Hi guys, so this is part two of our logic model discussion. So I wanted to go back now that we've reviewed the logic model interactive together. I want to go back and review the case study assignment from week two for the logic models. So again, just to backtrack for just a moment, make sure that you've had a chance to go back and read the case study portion, right, which is this latter portion here for the logic model assignment. That's where I am pulling the information that I'm about to show you from. So again, I certainly acknowledge that it would have I it would have been probably more helpful to give you more information in this particular in the context information here in the background information. Um, so that we could really focus on the latter portion of the logic model itself. But the way that it's written, I realize that it forces you to get really creative to some degree. So if we go back, and I'm going to follow the very similar model to what I used when I was explaining the logic model interactive example for week two, right? And if we look here, I'm going to start with the big picture goal. So what are we trying to accomplish here? Well, the big picture goal, or in other words, the overarching health issue, is that we're trying to decrease the incidence of obesity in the residents of Washington, D.C. So how are we going to do that? What's the big picture objective? One possible solution for this, right, is to improve access to healthy foods by adding fresh fruits and vegetables and or other healthful foods to corner stores. Again, this was information that was pulled directly from the background information for this particular case study. Now, this is the section here. This next section is where I wanted you to get creative and to think of some potential activities or programs, right? So what are the activities that would make up your program for how you would improve access to healthy foods through the corner stores? There's a lot of ways we could go about this, right? So in this case, what I wanted to see in your logic model is for you to get creative and to start to think of some ways that you could approach this issue. So for our example here together, I came up with three examples off the top of my head that I might use for this. So the first example is to develop, implement, and evaluate an educational program for corner store owners on merchandising and sales strategies of the newly added healthful foods. So in my mind, I'm thinking, maybe corner store owners are feeling apprehensive because they don't think that these foods will sell well, or maybe they don't know how to display them in a way that will be appealing for the consumer. But if they had some information on how to do this, they might feel more confident about their ability to do it and sell these particular foods. The second activity that I came up with was producing a monthly magazine for customers with healthy recipes and or meal ideas using food sold at the corner store. So I'll kind of give you this was stemmed from a personal example. So I have a Wegmans grocery store near me. And for those of you who are not on the East Coast and don't have a Wegmans, this particular chain near you, it's a very large grocery store. And every month or quarter, they send out a magazine. So I get this in the mail, and it's this amazing magazine that's filled with really super easy and healthy meal ideas and recipes using things that you can pick up in in the store. So anyhow, what immediately came to mind for me was this magazine. So I was like, well, this would be great to have something thinking about this corner store concept. I think that what could be a barrier for the consumer purchasing healthy foods and actually preparing them, and that might be they don't know how to do it. Maybe they don't have a concept of a meal idea, or don't know how to prepare some of these fresh fruits and veggies or these other healthy food options. So producing a magazine. Activity three was providing a subsidy or financial incentive to corner stores to increase their inventory of fresh fruits and vegetables or other healthful foods. So if we're asking in this program, right, if we're trying to improve access, and the idea is to inspire or incentivate, right, these corner stores to add these particular foods to their inventory, maybe they'd feel more incentivized, or they'd feel more compelled if they had a subsidy, if they received some kind of financial compensation for doing this. So maybe with the funding that we received as a part of this program, some of that money could go back to the corner stores to help them purchase these extra items, or even just money as an incentive. So that was my thought. Again, you can, if you'd like to redevelop your logic model, feel free to use these activities or get really creative. Think of your own ideas. What are some ways that you could imagine working with the corner stores to improve, not only improve the access, but ultimately improve the selling and purchasing of these healthful foods by not only the owners of the corner stores, but the consumers or the patrons of the corner stores. So, using these activities as an example, I'm moving down here. What are the short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes of each activity? So this is the next step that I would go through. And I would look at each activity and start to think about what changes do I want to see if we're talking about short-term outcomes. What changes do I want to see in knowledge, attitudes, skills, for example, beliefs? If I'm looking at my medium-term outcomes, I'm thinking about behaviors. So what are the behaviors that I want to see as a result of this particular activity? And when I think about the long-term outcomes, I'm thinking about the health outcomes. What are the ultimate changes in health that I want to see as a result of this particular activity? So I would answer those questions for activities 1, 2, and 3. And again, I just happen to come up with 3 examples. You can come up with 1, you can come up with 2 examples, or again, use all 3. Now, once you've actually come up with this information, once you have the answers to the questions of what are your short-term, medium-term, and long-term outcomes of each activity, you're going to compile or prepare your logic model. So from here, I would recommend filling out the logic model with the information that you've generated. So all the information that I have listed in my Word document above, right, from here to here, I would recommend filling out your logic model starting at the end and working your way backwards. So I would consider starting at the end, working your way backwards, and I would do this in chunks. So the first thing that I would do is start with the outcomes. So let me go back and pull up the interactive logic model so we can look at that example together. Okay, so now that we can see the picture of the logic model, so I would recommend starting here with the short-term, medium, intermediate, and long-term outcomes first. So once you've answered the question of what those statements should look like, then you're going to go back and fill in your logic model in these final 3 columns. The chunk 2, right? So the second step that I would take is now filling out the activities and the outputs, right? I would go back and do these 2 columns next. So the activities are going to be the activity examples that I came up with here, right? So what activities will make up your program? And then the outputs, right? The second part of that is what will your activities produce? So what is the result of each activity? So in the case of the Logic Model Interactive, right, when we were looking at this very first example of developing the professional development program, or more specifically, the activity of having these 5 professional development sessions, the outputs were really mostly around participation. How many people we expected to see go through that professional development program, how many students are impacted or influenced as a result of this, and how many lessons were conducted as a result. So in this case, right, when we're looking at the activities and outputs, if we're using the example of producing a monthly magazine for consumers with healthy recipes and/or meal ideas using food sold at the corner store, right? That's the activity that I would put right in here into this activity section. And then the outputs would be, what do I want to see as a result of this? Maybe I want to look at, start to track the number of magazines that were delivered to each corner store, and then see how many magazines are left at the end of the month. So how many people is the magazine reaching, right? So is the magazine only something that patrons will pick up from the store, or maybe we'll decide to mail the magazines out to residents that live within a certain radius of a particular corner store. And we can start to look at the reach that way, right? So that's just one example of the activity and an output that we might add here in that portion of the logic model. And then inputs is the section that I would do last. So once you have an idea, right, of what you're looking to accomplish, how you're going to accomplish it, we're going to go back and fill in the inputs. And that's all the things that are going to allow you to have all of your ducks in a row, right? So what needs to happen? Chunk 3 is the inputs. What needs to happen before the activities can be implemented? What steps are involved in your planning and preparation? What items do you need to make sure that you have in place? So in the case of the activity of, let's say we're delivering these magazines with recipes and meal ideas to corner stores, the input section is going to be to develop the magazine, to create this magazine. We have to first identify the foods that are being sold at the store, and then we have to find recipes or meal ideas that incorporate those particular items. And then we need to not then creatively develop the piece, right? This is where your health communication concepts come into play, right? Looking at, the language, how things are worded. So considering health literacy, looking at the aesthetics, right? And how the information is laid out within the magazine itself, looking at the colors that you're using for visual appeal, right? So we could go on and on. And so those would be the pieces that we would add into our input section that would comprise our logic model. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. And again, just gives you a little bit of insight into how my mind works and how I might go back and go through this process. If you have additional questions, concerns, anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. My apologies that this was a little bit longer than anticipated, but again, hopefully helpful for you in this development process. Okay, guys, thanks so much. Talk to you soon.